Ancient Rome. Julius Caesar wakes in the middle of the night to a sound, not a person, a bird. An owl is calling right outside his window on the Palatine Hill. He goes pale. The servant standing in the doorway is already trembling. Both of them know, if an owl calls at your house at night, you will die. This is not superstition. This is a law of nature, as fixed and certain as the laws of Rome itself. A few days later, Caesar is dead. Coincidence? Maybe. But here is what is definitely not a coincidence. The same animal, the same call, the same hour of night, terrifying people for 5,000 years, across 6 continents: Egypt, Rome, Greece, Mesopotamia, India, the Aztecs, the Celts. All of them feared the owl, independently, without any contact with each other. Why? What is it about this bird that caused civilizations separated by millennia and oceans to arrive at the same fear? Have you ever heard an owl at night in the woods? That call that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time? If you have, you know the feeling. Something tightens inside you, even when you know perfectly well there is nothing to be afraid of. Where does that come from? Why does a nocturnal bird trigger that reflex in us? And here is the main question we are going to answer today. What if the fear of owls was not superstition, not the ignorance of our ancestors? What if people had been sensing something real for thousands of years? Something that biology only explained in the 20th century. Today, we are going to break the owl down completely. From its place in the mythology of ancient civilizations to the anatomy that made it one of the most perfect nocturnal creatures on the planet. And by the end of this video, you will understand. People did not fear the owl because they were ignorant. They feared it because they were feeling the truth. Let us start with a fact that needs explaining. There are around 250 species of owls on this planet. They live on every continent except Antarctica. And in virtually every culture that encountered them, the owl became a symbol of the same thing. Death, the afterlife, a prophecy of doom. That is not a coincidence. To understand why, we need to start with Egypt. In Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, the owl is the letter M. But not just a letter. It was depicted in a specific way. Head turned directly toward the viewer, body in profile. It is the only hieroglyph shown facing forward. The Egyptians did nothing without a reason. A hieroglyph that looks you in the eye is a hieroglyph that sees you. In Egyptian tradition, the owl guarded the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It accompanied souls into the underworld, the duat, not as an enemy, as a guardian, a guide, the one who knows the road to where the living do not go. This matters. The owl was not a demon. It was a border guard between two worlds. Now let us move to Greece. There the owl became the bird of Athena, goddess of wisdom. The little owl, Athena Nectua, lived on the Athenian Acropolis. It was stamped on coins. Bringing owls to Athens was a Greek idiom for doing something pointless, like carrying coals to Newcastle. There were already enough owls in Athens. But Greece is the exception. In most other cultures, the owl stood not for wisdom, but for death. In ancient Rome, an owl's call predicted a killing. The belief was confirmed by several Roman writers. Owls had called out before the deaths of Julius Caesar, Augustus, and Agrippa. Pliny the Elder called the owl the most ill-omened of birds. Its appearance in the city required an official ceremony of atonement. If an owl flew into Rome, the Senate could declare a day of mourning. But Rome was not alone. In Mesopotamia, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, was depicted surrounded by owls. In the Hindu tradition, the owl is the mount of the goddess Lakshmi, but at the same time, a symbol of death. In Aztec culture, an owl's call meant exactly what it meant in Rome. Someone close to you is about to die. The Nahuatl phrase for the cry of the owl was a synonym for inevitable doom. On the other side of the planet, in Celtic Britain, the owl was the Cailleach Oiche, the witch of the night. In Japanese mythology, an owl's call was a warning of disaster. In Chinese tradition, the bird that carried away the souls of the dead. 6 continents, dozens of civilizations, one image. Scholars of mythology call this a universal archetype. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, believed that certain images live in the collective unconscious of humanity, regardless of culture or era. The owl is one of those images. But why the owl specifically? The answer is not in mythology. The answer is in biology. To understand why the owl triggers fear, you need to understand what it can actually do. Because over the last 100 years, biologists have established that what ancient people felt instinctively turned out to be a biochemical and anatomical fact. The owl is one of the most anatomically specialized predators on the planet. Every detail of its body is an answer to a single question. How do you kill in complete darkness without making a sound? Let us start with what you notice first, the eyes. An owl's eyes take up around 70% of its skull volume. For comparison, human eyes take up roughly 5% of our skull capacity. The eyes of a barn owl are comparable in size to human eyes, in a bird that weighs about 1 pound. If you scaled those proportions to a human being, we would have eyes the size of oranges. Why eyes that large? Light. Every photon counts. In humans, the ratio of cones to rods is roughly 1 to 20. In an owl, 1 to 100. Rods are the receptors responsible for vision in low light. An owl's eye is literally built to collect every available particle of light. Behind the retina sits the tapetum, a specialized reflective layer that bounces light back through the photoreceptors. Not a single photon goes to waste. But an owl's eyes are fixed, completely fixed. They cannot rotate in the socket the way ours do. Evolution solved that in an unexpected way. An owl's neck can rotate 270 degrees. Not 180, as the internet tends to say. 270. An owl can look straight backward and then swing its head almost all the way around without moving its body. The blood vessels in its neck have special bypass reservoirs to keep blood flowing to the brain during a sharp turn. This anatomical solution is so elegant that neurosurgeons are studying it as a potential model for preventing stroke. But vision is not the main thing. The main thing is hearing. Owl ears are asymmetrical, not as a metaphor, not poetically, literally asymmetrical. The right ear sits higher than the left, just a couple of inches, but that is enough. Sound reaches one ear a fraction of a millisecond before the other. The owl's brain calculates that difference and pinpoints the exact three-dimensional position of the sound source. The owl's facial disc, what makes its face flat and round, is not just an appearance, it is a parabolic antenna. In the 1970s, American biologist Roger Payne conducted an experiment that became a classic. He placed a barn owl in a completely darkened room with a mouse rustling across the floor. The mouse moved along a thin paper trail, leaving a soundtrack. The owl caught it, with what Payne described as perfect accuracy, without using vision at all. The experiment was repeated with the mouse dragged on a string, so it produced no scent whatsoever. The owl caught it anyway, on sound alone. An owl's hearing is precise enough to catch a mouse under a layer of snow in total darkness, navigating purely by the sound of footsteps beneath the surface. That is a problem that military-grade thermal imaging systems struggle to solve. The owl solves it, without any instruments. Now let us talk about flight. Owls have unique feathers. Along the leading edge of the primary feathers, there are soft, comb-like serrations. They break the airflow into tiny vortices, silencing the turbulence. Along the trailing edge, a fringe that absorbs sound. The underside of the wings, covered in soft down, acting as acoustic insulation. An owl flies in complete silence. Bioacousticians have measured the noise produced by different birds in flight. A pigeon generates around 50 decibels. An owl of the same weight, less than 20. That is below the hearing threshold for most prey. The owl literally does not exist acoustically for whatever it is attacking. Now think about our ancestors. They lived in a world where predators made noise. The rustle of grass, the snap of branches, the sound of heavy breathing. Hearing was the early warning system. And then suddenly, a creature that arrives from nowhere. No sound, in the dark, a cry, and the prey is gone. If you had been living 20,000 years ago beside a fire, and a call came out of the darkness and then silence, you could not have known the biology, but you would have felt it. Something out there kills without a sound. Something you cannot see. Something you cannot run from. That is exactly what encoded itself in the collective unconscious as the bird of death. Now, the kill itself. There is a moment in the owl's hunt that people watched for thousands of years and could not explain rationally. The prey never knows what happened, not because the owl is fast, though it is fast, but because everything happens in absolute silence, out of absolute darkness, with no warning of any kind. The owl dives with its talons extended. At the moment of impact, the talons close with a gripping force that biologists have measured at around 180 pounds per square inch in larger species. That is the force of a surgical clamp. A mouse's spine breaks before it can make a sound. But the most remarkable thing is not the strength. It is the precision. The owl does not just locate the mouse by sound. It calculates its trajectory, so that at the exact moment of impact, the talons are positioned precisely for the grip. One talon at the base of the skull, one at the breastbone. This is not luck. It is the result of neural computations the owl's brain runs in real time, correcting its flight path by sound in the final fractions of a second. An owl's brain is small relative to its body, smaller than the brains of crows or parrots. But the auditory lobes are proportionally enormous. It is a specialized processor built for one task: localizing sound and calculating trajectory in three-dimensional space. In that specific task, the owl outperforms any modern computer system of comparable size. Now, the voice. The call of an owl is one of the most recognizable sounds in nature, and at the same time, one of the hardest to locate. That is not an accident. The hoot of a tawny owl is a low-frequency sound, somewhere between 300 and 800 hertz. Low-frequency sounds are harder for the human ear to locate. We determine the direction of a sound by the difference in the time it takes to reach our left and right ears. For high frequencies, that difference is detectable. For low frequencies, it is too small. So we hear the owl, but we cannot tell where it is coming from. The sound comes from everywhere. Add darkness, a forest, night. The threat is there, but you cannot see it, and you cannot pinpoint it. That is the perfect condition for archetypal fear, a danger you cannot run from and cannot face. That is why an owl's call in a night forest triggers an instinctive alarm in us, even today. It is not superstition. It is an evolutionary response to a signal that indicated danger for millions of years of our prehistory. The owl is a creature that lives alongside us and that we almost never see. That is not a metaphor. The tawny owl, the most widespread owl in Europe and across much of the northern hemisphere, lives in cities. It nests in hollow old trees, in parks, in attics, in abandoned buildings. Right now, while you are watching this video, there is almost certainly an owl within a mile or two of you, maybe a few blocks away. You have never seen it, and you are unlikely to spot one by accident. The owl's camouflage is another example of evolution solving one problem with several tools at once. The tawny owl's plumage is gray-brown with a fine pattern that mimics tree bark. When a tawny owl sits motionless on a branch or trunk, it literally disappears. It does not hide behind branches or duck into cover. It just sits in plain sight and stops existing visually. Daytime behavior matches the camouflage. The owl chooses a roost and sits there virtually motionless for hours. If it senses danger, it does not fly away. It stretches, pulls its feathers in tight, making its body narrow and tall, until it looks even more like a broken branch or a knot in the bark. Small birds, however, can recognize it. Once an owl is spotted, mobbing begins. Birds, sometimes dozens of different species, gather around the owl and raise a racket. It is their way of neutralizing the predator. As long as it is surrounded by a screaming crowd, it cannot hunt. An experienced observer can actually find an owl during the day by following that noise. At night, the rules change. The owl becomes the owner of its territory, and it defends that territory with its voice. An owl's hoot is not simply a signal of presence. It is a detailed map. This is my territory. These are its edges. I am here. I hear you. Do not come closer. Bioacousticians studying tawny owls in Europe have shown that every bird has a unique vocal fingerprint, distinctive enough to identify individuals from recordings, the way you can identify people by their voice. A large male tawny owl's nighttime territory can cover several dozen acres. He patrols it every night, marking his presence with his voice. Other males respond, not to start a conflict, but to establish the boundary. I am here. You are there. The line between us is understood. It is a quiet war, running every night above our cities and forests. No blood, no contact, just voices in the dark. But there is one more story that almost nobody tells. What happens when the owl disappears? And why that matters, not to ornithologists, but to everyone. There is a concept called a trophic cascade. It describes what happens when the removal of one species triggers a chain reaction that reshapes the entire ecosystem. Owls sit at the center of one of the most important such cascades in temperate and northern climates. Here is a concrete example. A single breeding pair of barn owls eats around 1,000 mice, voles, and other small rodents per year. On the surface, that is just a number. But small rodents are among the primary carriers of tick-borne encephalitis and Lyme disease. They consume the seeds of specific plants, controlling how those plants spread. They dig burrows that reshape soil structure. When owls disappear from an area, the rodent population explodes. That is not a metaphor. In studies conducted across several European countries after owl populations collapsed due to rodenticide use, rodent numbers in some districts grew 5 to 8 times in just a few years. Owls are not just predators. They are a biological control system that has been running for millions of years. Many owl species are currently under threat. The reasons are the same as for most wildlife: habitat loss, pesticide and rodenticide use in agriculture, collisions with cars. Road traffic is one of the leading causes of barn owl deaths in Europe and the United States. The barn owl hunts along open fields, flying low to the ground. Rural roads cutting through those fields are the perfect setup for disaster. A low-flying bird, bright headlights, high speed. According to the British Trust for Ornithology, roughly 3 to 4 barn owls are killed on roads across the United Kingdom every single night, in one country alone. Second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, the most powerful rat poisons currently in use, accumulate in the tissues of poisoned rodents. An owl that eats several of those rodents takes in a dose that causes internal bleeding. It does not die immediately. It weakens over several days and then dies. This is called secondary poisoning, and it kills thousands of owls every year in Europe alone. In the United Kingdom, the barn owl population has fallen from roughly 12,000 breeding pairs in the mid-20th century to fewer than 4,000 today. Long-eared owl numbers have dropped by 30 to 40% in several regions over the last 2 decades. The barn owl, the tawny owl, the long-eared owl, they are disappearing quietly as they fly. And this is the point. It is not just the loss of a beautiful bird. It is the destruction of a control system that was running long before human beings arrived. The owl does not need our subsidies, does not require veterinary care, asks for nothing, except an old tree with a hollow, or an untreated meadow to hunt over. In return, it provides biological crop protection and rodent control, services that, if you tried to replace them, would cost farmers hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Let us come back to the beginning. In the mythology of human civilization, the owl is a symbol of death, the other world, and prophecy of doom. I promised to explain why that is not superstition. Our ancestors, the ones who lived by a fire 20,000 years ago, heard an owl at night and felt a reflexive fear. That fear was grounded in real experience. A creature that arrives from the dark without a sound, that cannot be seen, that is almost impossible to locate by hearing, that kills instantaneously. That creature is genuinely dangerous. Not to people directly, but to everything alive that moved around them at night. People did not know biology, but they correctly identified the perfect nocturnal predator. And that experience was encoded into myth over thousands of years. The owl became the messenger of death, not because it brings death to humans, but because it is the embodiment of death as a principle. Sudden, silent, inevitable. There is nothing in nature that fits that image more precisely. When the Greeks made the owl the bird of wisdom, they may have been closer to the truth than it seems. Because the owl really is one of the most intelligent creatures in its area of specialization. Not in the way crows or octopuses are intelligent, with flexible problem-solving and adaptable thinking, but in the way a perfectly engineered system is intelligent. Every component in the right place, every function optimized, nothing wasted. That is a different kind of wisdom. The wisdom of specialization. Owls have existed on Earth for around 60 million years. For comparison, the first primates appeared around 55 million years ago. While our ancestors were only just beginning the evolutionary path toward humans, owls were already flying through the night, already hearing movement under snow, already killing in silence. Dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. Owls came after them. They survived ice ages, climate shifts, the rise and fall of entire groups of animals. They are still here, right now, tonight, in a park a few blocks from where you are sitting. Different cultures gave owls different names. The witch of the night, the guardian of the threshold, the bird of death, the messenger of the gods. All of those names were trying to describe the same thing, a creature that belongs to another world, the world of darkness, silence, and death, and only occasionally lets us know it is there, with a call in the night. Maybe they were right. That other world just is not the afterlife. It is called night, and the god who rules it is the owl. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever heard an owl at night? What did it feel like in that moment? I genuinely want to know. I collect these stories. If you got something out of this video, hit the like button. It helps the algorithm put this in front of people who actually care about the natural world. Subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.